CATT-NW Season 1, Episode 20, Morf for Preparing Accessible Math Worksheets and Graphics.
CATT, Center for Assistive Technology Training Northwest.
Okay, welcome everybody to CATT-NW. This week, I'm so happy to introduce Jenny Prokes. Jenny is the APH Outreach Specialist for the Southwest, and Jenny will be sharing some strategies for preparing math graphics for the Monarch. So thank you so much, Jenny, for being here, and off to you.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this incredible series. I'm so excited for my inaugural visit. I hope it'll be the first of many. And I am really excited also for our topic today, which is strategies for preparing math graphics for the Monarch. They are not so different really from preparing other graphics. And so we're going to look at actually the preparation of all kinds of graphics. And we're not going to get software specific today, although I do typically use Microsoft Word just as my base because it's accessible for the most part to all of us. All of us have a version of it, but you can use many different software programs for this. Today, our objectives are to look at Braille fonts and software that you can use to create math graphics for the Monarch. We're going to look at basic principles for graphic design that are really well suited for use by the Monarch, and then also look at how ASCII to Braille conversion supports the development of Braille labels for electronic tactile graphics, because that might just be the most complex of all of the parts of the electronic graphics creation. So let's start with a few font downloads and files. In your linked presentation file, you're going to find these. The first is Braille 29, which is available from University of Washington, and I've got it linked here. For Braille 29 font, you're going to use 29 point as well. This is the best of the fonts to use with the Monarch, but there are other fonts you can use too that work okay. The Braille 36 font is typically the font that you're going to use with Tiger embossing. For that one, you would use 36 point. And also the Swell Braille True Type font will work if you use the 24 point. But just remember that the Braille 29 font with the 29 point is the best one for the Monarch. So it's a good idea to just, as a standard guideline, use that one. You can use Braille transcription programs if you want to in your tactile graphics creation. I like to use these if I have more text that I'm going to put on the page with my graphic than just a simple label. And so for that, anything that you're using will work. Braille Blaster will work, Perky Duck will work. Those are great because they're free. But if you're using Braille 2000 or Duxbury or any of the other mainstream paid translation softwares, those work really well too. Now, you can use many different software programs to create tactile graphics for the Monarch. And so I like to use Microsoft Word, but you can also use Tactile View or Firebird, which is free from APH, or the TGD QuickTac, which comes with Duxbury, Adobe Illustrator or Canva or Inkscape or CorelDRAW. The one software program that doesn't work very well for the Monarch is the Tiger software suite, just because of the way that the files are saved. But you can use the Tiger plugin with Word if you want to for Braille translation. Now, it's important to note the kinds of file types that the Monarch will accept. The Monarch's tactile viewer will take files that are saved in PDF or JPEG or PNG or BMP bitmap formats. And the PDF files will appear in the tactile viewer with 2 zoom levels, which gives you an overview where the full graphic is fit to the Monarch display at 100%, and then also a zoomed in view where you can pan around. The JPEG and the PNG and the BMP or bitmap files will appear with additional zoom levels. You can zoom in many times with those. But the JPEG and the PNG and the BMP files are image-only files, and so they don't support the inclusion of Braille. So the PDF is necessary if your graphic is going to include Braille labels or text, because this file type differentiates between text and image, rather than rendering all of the information as pixels. And the tactile results of the JPEG and the PNG and the BMP files also might be less reliable than those that are PDF files. Whatever software program you choose to use, it's a good idea to create template files that you can copy and paste simple or even complex drawings into that you've made. And this way, you don't have to recreate the drawings every time you need them, and you can manipulate them whenever you need to for new graphics. And you can also organize your files according to type if you like. For example, I have a file that just has basic shapes in it. So lines, dotted, dashed, solid, and also triangles, squares, circles, because you would not believe how many times you're going to need to use those. So you don't want to have to recreate them every time. And you can also have a file for 3D shapes, or a file for nets, or a file for Venn diagrams, or a file for for other kinds of shapes. I really like to use these template files because they just make electronic graphics creation so much faster. Now, when you're creating your tactile graphics, this is true whether you are embossing your graphics or whether you're making them for the Monarch. But for the Monarch particularly, it's best to use uncomplicated shapes that have clear boundaries and that can be easily distinguished for what they are. So simple line drawings and also shape outlines or fully filled shapes work especially well. Now, I like to use a drawing space, in other words, a blank file that has boundaries that mimic a full Braille page with a landscape layout and then the equivalent of 25 lines and 40 Braille cells across the width of the page. So, for example, the margins that I typically use when I'm creating a word drawing are 0.5 inches for the top boundary and 0.4 inches for the bottom boundary, 0.6 inches for the left boundary, and 0.5 inches for the right boundary. So you can see that that gives me a lot more space on my page than 1-inch boundaries for all of those sides. Now, these margins that I use were originally created for an embossable document that had specifications for a particular embosser. So these are just guidelines. You don't have to use exactly these. Use the margins that work best for you. But the larger page gives you more flexibility for larger drawings. Typically, when you're using drawing software like Word or Canva or Inkscape or Tactile View, it's recommended that your tactile graphics be left adjusted and start at the top of the page, unless there's text that goes before it. And the reason for this is just because when you emboss them, then it's easier and more consistent for a reader to find them if they're just always located in this place. But it is different for the Monarch because of the space that we're working in. And so it's best for the Monarch if you place your drawings in the center of your page so that your user can quickly see a centered, zoomed out representation and then move quickly into a salient feature by zooming in. And it's also best to keep your graphic size to a minimum while still properly representing and distinguishing all of its parts so that your user doesn't have to pan excessively to locate all of it. Generally, it's a good idea to keep your tactile graphics between about 3.5 inches by 8 inches at the smallest, and then 11 inches by 11.5 inches at the largest. Now, shape, fills, and outlines are awesome features in any software, and they can be used to a reader's advantage to create distinguishing features in a drawing. But for the Monarch, it is wise to be somewhat conservative in your use of shape, fill, and outline features. And this is because the Monarch, unlike many embossers, only has a single dot height, and the dots themselves are not at all distinguished from each other. So textures with fine detail, for example, something like snow dots, don't translate to the Monarch quite like you might think that they will. And the larger the details in a texture, in a fill, the better it's going to appear on the Monarch. So those brick patterns, the checkerboards that have like 1/4-inch squares are pretty discernible on the Monarch. Also, line and checkerboard patterns are both successful on the Monarch and also embossers like the Pixblaster. And then horizontal and vertical and diagonal lines, if you space them at least 3/16 of an inch apart, they show up pretty well. And the smaller sizes might appear in some limited detail. You'll find this if you experiment with them, but they may have missing dots and textures or parts that aren't really distinct. And it's true that some graphic details intended for Monarch display would really benefit from simplification or representation in other ways than using multiple textures. Your dark fill colors are going to work the best, black or dark blue. The light colors will not show up at all on the Monarch. They won't even appear. So it's a good idea to experiment with fills of different colors and types to see how the Monarch's going to render them. And just remember that fills can have variable results with the Monarch, so it's not always possible to use them to distinguish different tactile areas. So once again, use different strategies for distinguishing things. And then a little bit about line weights. A 1-point line will work for Monarch drawings. A 2-point line is a little bit better, gives more definition. And same thing as with fills. It's a good idea to experiment and then check your results, especially with your students, to see if things are really showing up the way that you think they're going to. Different weights of lines will provide different contrasts, and you can use dashes for different types of lines, but it's a good idea to use a solid black line only, just as a general rule. And that's true for text as well. Generally, any value greater than 80% black will show up in the tactile viewer's default settings without the more detail filter. But the values that are lower than 40% black will not show up in the tactile viewer. But if you use the more detail filter, then you might be able to get some result from it. Lines between 2 and 5 points generally display on the Monarch as a single row of pins. There is some variation depending on where lines are located. For example, if they fall between pins, or if they're vertical versus horizontal or diagonal or curved or whatever. Now, if you want to increase the thickness of a line, the general rule is to increase the line weight in increments of 5. So 5-point line will create 1 row of dots or pins. A 10-point line will create 2 rows of pins. A 15-point line will create 3 rows of pins, and so forth. Now, just one word about arrows, which is generally the arrows that you use in drawing software, the ones that are already created inside that software, don't show up on the Monarch. They just don't appear at all, not even the lines do. But instead, you can create your own arrows using line segments that render both the arrow's shaft and also the arrowhead. So, for example, on this page right here, there is a horizontal shaft in this arrow, and then there are line segments that have been used to create the arrowheads, the double-headed arrow here, and then the single-headed arrow here. And both of these are 5-point lines. So you can see that they're pretty thick when you're looking at them in the drawing software, but on the Monarch, they're going to show up probably as a single row of pins. Now, if you want to create distinct lines and shapes in a complex graphic, then you can use different textures like we mentioned. You can also use different types of lines, or you can leave at least 1/8 of an inch of blank space around a line or an area or a point. So on this slide, we've got 2 different ways to show where things cross. We've got rectangles where one is a solid line and one is a dashed line. That works pretty well. And then we also have one where a little bit of blank space has been left around the areas where the 2 shapes intersect. It is a good idea to leave a margin of at least 1/2 inch around your entire graphic when you finish, just so that it doesn't coincide with the edges of the Monarch's screen or overlap with them. Now, just a quick word about Braille labels. 2 different kinds of Braille labels, uncontracted and contracted, and it's not going to surprise you that the uncontracted are easier to work with. If your labels will be uncontracted, your life is pretty easy. You're going to use all of the letters on the keyboard to type your text. If you need a capital sign, you're going to use a comma. So for example, if I'm going to type the name Rose with a capital R, I will first press the comma and then R-O-S-E. The comma is the QWERTY equivalent for the .6, and it will show up in Braille, if you're using that Braille 29 font, as a capital sign. If you want numbers, the first thing you do is you press the crosshatch key, which is Shift+3. Then you press the letter that corresponds to each number. For example, if I want the number 4, then I will press the crosshatch and the D. If I want the number 10, I will press the crosshatch and then the A and the J. If I want a period, I will press the number 4. 4 is the QWERTY equivalent for dots 2, 5, 6, and that's the number 4 on the number row or on a numpad. Now, a few other punctuation marks, just so you know the equivalents. If I want a comma, I press the number 1. A semicolon is the number 2. That'll be dots 2 and 3. A colon will be the number 3. An exclamation mark will be the number 6. The question mark and the open quotes sign in Braille is the same, and that'll just be the number 8. And then close quotes is a 0. So that is a quick introduction to ASCII on the keyboard. But now let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. If your labels are contracted, then you have to use the computer language ASCII, which assigns each of the letter and number and print signs on the keyboard one symbol that corresponds to a Braille character. So I have provided one chart that you can use for ASCII to Braille conversion. All that this means is that every time that I press any kind of key that has a symbol or a letter or a punctuation mark on the keyboard, if I'm using a Braille font, then it's going to show up as some Braille character. I just have to know what they are. So for example, if I want the contraction, then I will use an exclamation mark on the keyboard. I'll just press Shift+1 for an exclamation mark, and it will actually show up as the contraction the, dots 2, 3, 4, 6 in Braille. If I want the ED contraction, then I press the $sign on the keyboard. If I want the SH contraction, it's the %sign. So you just have to memorize these. And then if I want dots 5, 6, which I need for a lot of contractions, then I'll press the caret sign. Or if I want the CH contraction, then I will press the star sign, the asterisk. So here's just an example. I'm going to leave my presentation for a second. I'm going to go into my drawing space, and I'm going to just show you 1 or 2 examples of this. If I want to type my name, for example, I'm using a Braille font right now. I will press the comma first, and that gives me a .6. And then I'll press a J. And then for EN, I actually need a contraction, and the equivalent of that is 5. So I just hit 5 on my keyboard, and there it is. And then the rest of my name is easy at NY. If I want Frodo Baggins, that's fairly easy to start with. I need a comma for a .6, and then Frodo, just type that out. And then Baggins, BA, and then the GG, that's a 7 on my keyboard. I just memorized that. And then IN is a 9, and then an S. Oops, an extra W. So ASCII is actually pretty simple just once you've gotten used to it and you've memorized it. And so use your ASCII to Braille conversion chart for that. And I think that you'll find it pretty simple. And just let me switch back real quick. A word or two about elements in graphics. You have 4 different kinds of elements. You've got areas, lines, points, and labels. So when you are making some decisions about what to include in your graphic, just keep in mind that these different elements have to basically work together. Most often, your tactile graphics are not exact replicas of the print. So they are representations of material rather than strict reproduction. Whenever you look at a graphic, the first thing you want to do is identify the content that you need to include. Because remember that with the Monarch, we want to be as uncomplicated as possible. Look at the key components that you're going to be reproducing and how you want to create them. How are you going to represent those areas, the lines, the points, the labels, and even keys if you need them. And eliminate unnecessary parts. So as a general rule, automatically omit anything that is decorative. And then for the complicated graphics, determine what you need to convey through meaning and what is extraneous. Then make your graphics as small as makes sense while still leaving enough space for exploration and recognition, especially of small hands and unfamiliar users are going to be looking at them. Avoid clutter. Simplify as much as possible. You can often take print graphics and alter them effectively to better fit a tactile format without altering the meaning. For example, sometimes in print graphics, you're going to find things like cars that our students need to use for counting purposes. And you can use dots, you can use stars, you can use rectangles. You can simplify those print images while still retaining the meaning. You can take 3D images and you can render them in a 2D tactile format if you help your student to understand how you've done this. You can separate complex images into multiple graphics whenever that's necessary. Keep your delineations between elements, your lines, your areas, and your points as clean and discriminatory as possible. And once again, check your results. When you've created a drawing, look at it on the Monarch and show your student and make sure that it's easy to tell where things are and where they start and stop. And don't put your labels too close to your elements and don't put them too far away so that it's hard to find where they are. And then if you need a key, it's best if you put it on the same page as the graphic so that a student doesn't have to flip between pages. But the Monarch does make it fairly easy to move from one page to another. And in a PDF file, you can save a key on one page and you can save a graphic on another page. And then a student can move from the key to the graphic with a fair amount of ease. I do have a homework assignment for all of you before we get to questions. And so I would love actually to hear from you about this one. I would really love it if you would choose a math topic that is important to your student and then create a tactile graphic that represents that topic and include Braille labels if your graphic needs them. Practice with the ASCII chart. And if you have access to a Monarch, then open it there and inspect it and fix any problems that you've got. And when you're satisfied, or if you don't have access to a Monarch, then send it to me. jprokes, Jprokes at aph.org. And I will send my feedback, and absolutely I will send my compliments too. That takes me to the end of this presentation. And so I would like to open it up for questions. Anything that you would like to ask?
Great. And Jenny, I just wanted to say, I love that you left us with homework. I think you might be the first presenter to do that. I so appreciate you making yourself available for feedback and always helping our community get better at what we do. Now, before we open things up for feedback, I just want to finish the recording. We'll end the recording here. Just wanted to thank you again for coming to demo. Your wisdom and your expertise, both as a TVI and transcriber, always shines in your presentations. So thank you. And I really most appreciate your suggestion to include our students in the final kind of feedback process. I think designing with our students is always such an important tip as we prepare alt media for students. So thank you so much, Jenny, for coming. And as far as the recording is concerned, that is it for our Tech in 20 this week, where we meow at your tech needs. Thank you all for joining us, and see you next time.
CATT, Center for Assistive Technology Training Northwest.
The contents of this video were developed through a partnership with the American Printing House of the Blind, APH. CATT Northwest is based at the Washington State School for the Blind, WSSB. Logos, WSSB and APH. The contents of this video were developed under a contract authorized by the Department of Education. However, these contents do not necessarily represent the policy of the Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government.